next season, join us as I don't know what we're doing. I don't know. And next season, join us as we discuss I don't know. I'm gonna have to put this in later.
Something.
Something.
Next season when we discuss Thronebreaker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a Global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from Good Morn, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international Hansa accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cyrilla of Sintra, across the continent. Well, here we are at the last episode of this season. Thank you so much for coming along with me and the rest of our international community as we read Andrzej Sapkowski's Baptism of Fire, the third book in the Witcher saga. So after this, as usual, we will take a 3-month break. Breakfast in Beauclair will return on Thursday, September 4th with Tower of Swallows, or, God willing, The Witcher Season 4. Thank you so much to our patrons and our producer-level patrons, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Charlotte from Engberg Glamorai, The Original Brooch, Libby, John of Rivia, Tom from Australia, Jill Keith the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, Softie, Lisa C., and Red Kite. If you would like to learn more about supporting Breakfast in Beauclair, once the new season starts, visit patreon.com/Breakfast in Beauclair. As for this episode, Abe from Sweden, Daniel from the Netherlands, and Softie from the UK call in for Andrzej Sapkowski's Baptism of Fire, Chapter 7. Join us as we discuss the epic conclusion to the book at the Battle of the Bridge, Witch Dudes and Witch Lads, CD Projekt Red's Thronebreaker, The Witcher Tales, druidic timescales, framing narratives as foreshadowing, vampiric tropes, identity and redemption, fantasy as satire, the meandering nature of the book and what it provides to readers, turning Milva's pregnancy into a group project, and the ironic origin of Geralt of Rivia. Without further ado, let's get to our final discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Baptism of Fire, Chapter 7. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name's Alyssa, and today we're welcoming 3 members of our Hansa to the show. My first guest hails from Sweden, where he's currently studying to become a music teacher. He can often be found practicing singing, piano, cello, and other instruments, and enjoys arranging and composing music. In his spare time, he loves board games, video games, bouldering, and jogging while taking care of his 2 cats. You'll recognize my second guest from their appearance on the show, covering Sapkowski's Blood of Elves, Chapter 6. They're half Dutch and half German, and he started studying history in Leiden and is currently writing his bachelor thesis about mysteries and politics in the high medieval Baltic. He enjoys analyzing politics and warfare fantasy, and nowadays is distracted by Warhammer miniatures. My third guest appeared on the show covering Netflix's Blood Origin 101 and Sapkowski's Time of Contempt, Chapter 1. He was born in the Midlands, raised in Cape Town and in the southeast of England, but finally settled in the northeast with his 3 children and 2 cats. He works as a Squall developer and is obsessive about books, films, hiking, board games, miniatures, video games, and football. Please welcome Abe, Daniel, and Softie. Hi, guys.
Hey, yeah. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
I thoroughly enjoyed reading all of your bios because as I kept reading them, I was like, oh, 2 of you have 2 cats. All of you are into like video games and board games. 2 of you are into miniatures. I'm interviewing the same person. But as we get started, Daniel, Softie, welcome back. Abe, it's your first time on the show as a new guest. Would you mind telling us how you got into The Witcher?
Yeah, back in high school, my friend was very hyped about The Witcher 3. I think I saw a playthrough of it and got really intrigued. And so then at some point I started playing the games and eventually started reading the books as well in Swedish at first. But the translation for in Swedish is not very good. So I quickly ordered the English versions.
Is there anything in the Swedish translations that you found particularly either silly or interesting?
Well, it's mostly like the word Witcher that they translate, because it's translated into hexkar, which is basically like a a witch dude. He kind of, or like a witch sir. A card is like, oh, he's a real guy. He's a
He sounds like a proper lad.
yeah, a true lad. A witch lad. But yeah, so I started reading the books, and after that, of course, the Netflix series came out, and but I started with the games.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and I assume that you're also a longtime listener of the podcast, because I do remember you were in our big community like sing along for Toss a Coin to Your Witcher in 2019 before the Netflix series even premiered. So I was
Definitely.
very excited for you to come onto the podcast.
Yeah, it was amazing being part of that, actually.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. I was on vacation with my parents, so I was like, okay, guys, I just got to go into my room, like a separate room real quick. And they were like, what are you doing? So it was very like,
Important and urgent nerd things. That's
exactly.
On the subject of important and urgent nerd things, prior to recording, Softie and Daniel and I were discussing miniatures, board games, video games, all that fun stuff. How are you both? What's been going on with you both since you last were on the show?
Everything's exactly the same for me.
I love that.
Life moves very, very slowly for me now. Thank goodness things have slowed down a little, but it does sometimes feel like I'm living the same day endlessly. So I've got to switch things up a bit one of these days.
Yeah, you seem to have a very nice routine, like wandering the Highlands and then playing board games as well. But I love all the photos you have of Hadrian as well on the Discord.
I missed a beautiful sunrise this morning because I didn't want to tempt fate. I thought, well, I could go out, but it was icy, and going up and down those rock stairs in the ice, I thought, you don't really want to get a call from me to say, I'm in traction. Can't do the podcast, but I missed a gorgeous one today. So
Aww.
yeah, it was the mist had risen from all in the river valleys and things, so the whole place was covered in like a light fog, but then with thick ice and snow above on the hills. And then just the whole sky went red. It was gorgeous. But I had to watch it from my bedroom instead of being out there on the hills.
Well, that sounds beautiful. What about you, Danielle? How have things been since I feel like it must be like 2 years, 3 years since we were recording Blood of Elves?
Something like that, yeah. It was also at the end of Blood of the Elves, but yeah, that's been, of course, Netflix seasons in between, another entire book in between. Yeah, no, a lot has changed. That's for sure.
We released those episodes September 2021. So we must have recorded even earlier than that.
Yeah, a lot has changed. I mean, I now, for example, have pets. 3 rats, to be specific.
Oh.
Like, they always say, like, rats are smart creatures. But because they're technically smart creatures, they are more explicitly dumb. Like, there's like certain animals you're like, okay, of course they do dumb things because they're an animal, I guess. But you can see that the rat is like, that he has the capability to do smart things, and then he just still tumbles over because he tries to grab a snack from a different platform or something, And you're like, yeah, like you mentioned in the intro on my bachelor thesis, but yeah, that's it.
Can you give us a little teaser of what you're working on?
During 12th century medieval Europe is a large coastal area which is called Pomerania, not Polish yet or German at this point, but a different group, Pomeranians, in contrast to their neighbors, still pagan. And there have been already a lot of attempts to Christianize them through missionary missions. One German bishop, Otto of Bamberg, goes there and he suddenly is considered successful, converts the entire area. I'm mainly looking at, well, was he successful Christian, like doing the mission? Like, was he just very charismatic and all that? Or was it that the kingdoms of Poland and the Holy Roman Empire were just already briefing down the neck of the Pomeranians, being like, oh yeah, either you convert or you die. So I'm kind of looking at what brought forth the change.
I take it our sources for how successful this was just what Otto wrote about how brilliant it all was, rather than anyone else coming in and saying, actually.
Well, kind of, yeah. Like, there are 3 sources for it. Well, technically more, but my main 3 ones are written by different monks who wrote it as sort of like hagiography, I think is the English word for it, which is basically like a biography for a holy person, because later this man has been declared a saint. Then you feel like, okay, so it's going to be already a bit biased because you're going to write it for someone who is saint. But they also, all 3 came from abbeys that he founded.
Right.
But the funny thing is, I'm specifically using those sources to see what we know, because we only know that. But because there are 3 different ones, describing the same period, you can see enough little differences you can then look for to shape a picture.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I love hearing more about like the way that history is uncovered. And I'm sure that especially as we discuss not only the little teaser we have about like the Battle of the Bridge not even being chronicled by future historians, but also as we talk about the military movements, I'm really interested to see how you guys dissect and explore that. But before we finish our introductions, as we're talking about just the sheer circular Venn diagram of all of your interests, do you guys happen to have any recent video game or board game recommendations for listeners' Breakfast in Beauclair?
Well, technically one, but it's more so what's also fitting with this episode is the video game Gwent Thronebreaker. Its story follows Milva, basically the events of the end of Time of Contempt and the rest of the Baptism of Fire from her perspective, which is very fun if you've read the books, because it's still full of surprises, because you follow a perspective which is completely different, but she constantly hints from the books coming back until it slowly culminates where, Milva and Geralt meet each other at the Battle of the Bridge. So it's a nice build-up. Most of the battles are Gwent, though, so that can be less, but the story and atmosphere, fantastic.
I just want to +1 on everything that Daniel just said. And I remember I played it like when it came out, and I hadn't seen any like commercial or like about it at all. So I was very surprised. Like, wait, this game exists? Wait, how did I miss a new Witcher game coming out? I feel like they were very like under the radar with it. But yeah, I also loved it, and it's a very like interesting perspective of like this character, this group of characters, I guess, that you've heard about like secondhand. I guess it's just an amazing way to tell a story.
One of the things that Daniel called out prior to the call was the music. From, I guess, the musician's perspective, Abe, like, what did you think of the music in Thronebreaker or the music in the Witcher series as a whole?
As a whole, we could talk about like for weeks. Right? Yeah, but specifically Thronebreaker, if I'm gonna, like Daniel said, very atmospheric. Like a lot of the music in Thronebreaker is like very folksy from like Slavic roots. And it's I feel like it really captures like the everyday music sometimes that you encounter. Also, one of my absolute favorite parts of the game is these little like pop-up things like right before a battle or like something happens, and it's like a storyteller saying what's going on, and then there are like little music things. It's like basically reading and listening to an audiobook that has like all of these little audio snippets that's doing, and then sometimes they use music as well. I believe there was at one point like a lute being broken, and it's just yes, the sound just absolutely hurts. Yeah, the strings just snapping. Oh, yeah.
Crushing. You both said that they didn't do a ton of marketing around Thronebreaker, but I think you guys are doing a really good job of selling it. Like, I want to sit down and play that this afternoon. So now that we've spoken about history and battles and taking ships and crossing them and falling into port, that of course leads us to today's podcast episode. And today we'll conclude our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Baptism of Fire with Chapter 7, in which Regis dispels vampire myths, the company reunites with Zoltan and Shive, and learns Milva's pregnant. They get caught in a battle where the Witcher is officially knighted as Geralt of Rivia. Here's a quick synopsis of the episode from feature Alyssa. In Chapter 7 of Baptism of Fire, years in the future, the wandering storyteller Strybog entertains children around a campfire with tales of Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri. His story shifts to Geralt and his company as they journey from the Yaruga to the Forest of the Angren in search of the druids of Cade Du, hoping they can locate Ciri. Along the way, the group grows uneasy about Regis's vampiric nature. Geralt defends him, citing Regis's moral integrity despite his dangerous abilities. Later, Regis reveals he gave up drinking blood after it became an addiction that led to his violent dismemberment. Regis assures the group that he no longer drinks blood and debunks common myths about vampires. The company witnesses the scars of war, razed forests, displaced people, and avoids battle zones. They unexpectedly reunite with Zoltan and his group, including the girl accused of witchcraft at the refugee camp. After Regis heals her, she delivers a cryptic prophecy foretelling blood, death, and a baptism of fire, as well as a mention of the Tower of Swallows. Before parting, Zoltan gifts Geralt his sword. The group later encounters peasants claiming to have been saved by a white queen. Dandelion speculates it might be Rivian forces, but is unsure, as Rivia and Lyria were devastated at the war's outset. Geralt clarifies to the group that his name, Geralt of Rivia, was a fabrication and he isn't truly Rivian. Soon, Regis reveals a sensitive matter. Milva is pregnant and is asked for an elixir to terminate the pregnancy. The group of men openly discusses the situation before Geralt speaks with Milva privately. She expresses fear of motherhood and hints that helping Geralt find Ciri may be her way of seeking redemption. She ultimately chooses to keep the child, and Regis discards the elixir. With Milva's condition in mind, Geralt abandons the plan to travel through Ysgryth and opts to cross through Ruga again, despite the danger of encountering soldiers. They find a ferry but are attacked mid-crossing by Lyrian guerrillas and the Nilfgaardian army. Downriver at the Red Port, they're drawn into a brutal battle between Imperial and Northern forces. Milva suffers miscarriage, and Regis aids her as Geralt and Cahir rally Nordlings to hold the bridge. Their bravery reignites the Nordlings' fighting spirit. In the midst of battle, fire consumes the port. Geralt and Cahir fight through the flames, enduring what becomes their baptism of fire. They're saved by the arrival of Queen Maeve's forces, which drives the Nilfgaardians to retreat. Afterward, Queen Maeve, impressed by Geralt's bravery, knights him as Geralt of Rivia, formalizing the name he once chose for himself. So now that we've gotten a synopsis of the episode, I would love to hear from all of you. What were some of your overall thoughts, highlights, lowlights at the end of this book?
Yeah, one thing I was very impressed with was just the whole battle at the port at the end of the story and things. It's actually quite complicated because you've got each side is on the wrong side of the river, basically. And the characters are misidentifying people. And somehow there's this swirling combat that you've got, the goodies are attacking from the baddies' bank.
Yeah.
And the baddies are attacking in the port. But who's in the port? Well, it's dwarves. Which side are they on? It's, it should be hugely confusing, but it isn't. It's actually beautifully done. Although I do believe at the very beginning they claim that the ferry's on the left bank, which it should be on the right bank, which is where they start from. But apart from that, I think everything fits together beautifully. And you compare it to sort of a modern movie or something where you've got absolutely no idea what's going on, who's facing which way. They're really bad at telling stories visually these days, but somehow just writing it, it does it beautifully. And it's quite short, for all the stuff that's packed into it. It's amazing. So I really like that. Other than that, the big thing that I enjoyed was the sort of camaraderie, the way the Hansa starts building at this point. It's always a sign of, they say about familiarity breeds contempt, and it's these guys are getting to know each other well enough that they're annoying each other.
Yeah.
and there's so much lovely human nature in it that I particularly enjoy the fact that Dandelion and Geralt find Regis a bit pompous, which is so rich coming from them, because you always hate in other people what you don't like in yourselves.
Yes.
And think of those two windbags pontificating away the way they do when they get together on a riverbank. And it's like, oh, he goes on a bit, doesn't he? It's like, oh, yeah, Regis, yeah, he's definitely a bore, compared to you two.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I try not to be Regis myself and let someone else
That's
speak. Sorry.
quite all right. Again, just the +1 and everything that Softie said. I get a flashback from like the Lesser Evil short story where Geralt just goes on a whole like philosophical rant for like, I don't know, it's like 5 pages or something. And then he's like, oh, this Regis guy.
Goes on a bit.
A lot of just interesting, like deeper and like more vulnerable moments for a lot of the characters. And also just the interactions that they have are also like sometimes very vulnerable in the chapter. And we'll go more into that later. I feel like it's a lot of like heart to heart, and sometimes just Sapkowski just like writing that they look at each other a certain way and they understand each other. For me that's very like heartwarming. But yeah, and also the whole fairy part was for me, it was like an action like movie shootout. Like I was listening to Spotify while reading, and the song "Ecstasy of Gold" goes like came on right as Milva is like shooting them. And very very cowboy-esque.
Yeah. What about you, Daniel?
I just thought it was a great chapter. Just mainly remember definitely the first time I read it. Like I usually tended to listen also like then for example Witcher ambient tracks in the background, to get extra in the atmosphere. Definitely this chapter always had like already a sense of dread in it. but never really explained the dread. Like, partially, of course, the stress around Milva's pregnancy, but also the Battle of the Bridge. Both are not fully communicated at the beginning of the chapter. You always constantly feel like something's going to happen. You know, they're going to end up at the end, captured all of them, or someone died. You get the feeling like something like that's going to happen the entire chapter, at least that's what I had feeling. And then it just ends, you know, of Geralt getting knighted at the end
Yeah.
into Geralt of Rivia. I remember I was sitting like, I think, like in a lounge of the university. I was just laughing out loud because it was just such a, I don't know, just Sapkowski winking at all the readers, so to say.
Yeah. What a silly twist and a silly end to the book. This is a nugget that's only dropped in this chapter, and we had no idea that Geralt of Rivia wasn't really Geralt of Rivia and not Geralt's Eric Hope, Beauregard, whatever. What a silly and sly thing to do to kind of upend everything that the reader assumed, like in a few lines in a single chapter. Very, very masterful and very fun.
And he's got a lovely throw forward hidden in there as well, hasn't he? And
Yeah.
and they're discussing the names, and Dandelion scoffs that name that he was going to choose, the great big long one and stuff.
Yeah.
And then he's got Regis and here both being looking all, embarrassed about their great big names and saying, oh, no, that's just a regular Nilfgaardian name. And and Regis saying, well, that's just the kind of name vampires get,
Nilfgaardian? He is from Vico Faro, good sir. There's
Exactly.
a very big difference.
But then, of course, you've got the lovely little sneaky thing in there that we will later find out that Dandelion's got a ludicrous name himself, but he has decided not to share it at this point.
Yeah. Julian Alfred Pancratz. I forget the rest of his titles.
De Lettenhove, is it?
Yes, the Viscount of Lettenhove. Yes. I mean, for me, it's no secret that Baptism of Fire is, or has been, my favorite book in this series. As we're revisiting them, maybe I'm getting new perspectives, but at the time that I first read them, Baptism of Fire was my favorite, and I think a lot of it has to do with the sequence at the bridge. I think I can still recite it, and we'll talk about this during the Baptism of Fire question, but there's an entire excerpt of the book that just really stood out to me and that I just committed to memory for no functional reason. Probably forgot some pretty important stuff making room for this. But I find the culmination of this book in which nothing really happens. Like, the stakes are very low throughout Baptism of Fire, generally. And nothing really happens when you actually dig into each of these chapters in detail. But somehow, as you said, especially with all these vulnerable moments with the characters, there's payoff in Chapter 7. We have the final reveal of everything about Regis. We have the reveal of Milva's pregnancy and why she's with the Witcher. And Cahir as well undergoes, a different kind of redemption, contrary to what has been happening to him this whole chapter. So it does feel very purposeful. It did very much surprise me when I went back to re-listen to this chapter on the audiobook this morning. I clicked on Chapter 7. It's 1.5 to 2 hours long. I was like, holy shit, really? Because I've forgotten that the entire chapter wasn't just the Battle of the Bridge, that there really is all this preamble. There's a framing narrative within a framing narrative. Both just disappear halfway through, and then there's the rest of the story. And the Battle of the Bridge itself is only the last 30 pages. But what a fun way to end the book.
One thing that I, for example, always stuck in my head was Dandelion's story about the druids going to the King of Cidaris, talk about the fishing rights. And I thought, I mean, it was a bit silly, of course. If you don't stop fishing now with these smaller nets, then in 2,000 years, you'll have overfished. But I think it's also very fitting at the same time saying, definitely when Sapkowski wrote this book, humans ruin nature is a problem. Will it affect us in the next 10, 20 years? No? Okay, then we'll see it then. Like the king says, come back in 1,000 years, and then once again with the problem, we'll see what we can do then. I don't know, because it's so out of left field, because it's partially so silly. Sapkowski suddenly says, I know I'm writing for the modern audience, so I'm going to put something that's actually not about fantasy, but more about our current society and world.
Yeah, he does a really lovely job of threading present controversies into the books. So obviously, women's right to choose is a huge part of this chapter as well, surrounding Milva's pregnancy, and we'll talk about that. But it's interesting that you bring up that little anecdote that Dandelion shares, especially considering in the previous chapter, when we were with the Lodge of Sorceresses, they spend all this time talking about their longevity and the future of magic, contrary to the short lifespan of these kings. I hadn't really thought about the juxtaposition there, but it's interesting to kind of have those back to back in chapters.
Yeah, and at the time he's writing, of course, there was the big hole in the ozone layer in the southern hemisphere was the big thing that everyone was concerned about then. And, could we change the kinds of propellants people were using in hairspray and stuff to turn this around? It worked against us a bit that hole kind of got closed, but it really got closed because of all the carbon we were pumping into the atmosphere. So, kind of a good thing and a bad thing. So, yeah, it did go away, but not actually because of what we thought we'd done.
Yeah.
So we've made things worse.
Monkey's paw of closing the ozone.
Yeah. But yeah, no, very much so, that, and to make it humorous, that everyone just thinks it's ludicrous to be thinking that far in advance, that no one is stopping to think, have the druids got a point? They're just figures of fun at this point, which is very much the way people who are concerned about the environment were being treated for an awfully long time. And they're trying to do the same now with the Just Stop Oil protesters, that they're seen as more of a nuisance than people who are trying to tell you something serious.
Also, like in this chapter is mentioned by Regis, but also I think The Last Wish, about the sun actually being quite deadly in the world of The Witcher, but like more in the long-term exposure kind of way. And at the beginning, is this just a different kind of sun or what's going on here? But I just realized now that you say that, Softie, like probably Sapkowski was inspired by, the whole ozone layer and maybe the idea that in the Witcher world, there is no ozone layer anymore or it's already degrading faster. And that's why the sun is hurting more.
I assumed it was just a little snide comment about wearing sunscreen.
I think it's the wild hunt tearing holes in the sky every time they come through. I reckon.
Yeah. Always chalk it up to the gods if it can't be explained. So now that we've talked through some of our overall thoughts on the chapter, I would love to dive into our discussion questions. Famously, Sapkowski loves using framing narratives. As I said, he's got a framing narrative within a framing narrative. Geralt is, until midway through the chapter, is talking about everything that preceded midway through the chapter. And then also there's a preamble that takes place about a century into the future. And how does Sapkowski use the framing device of Strybog's storytelling to really reflect on the epic nature of the present-day company, Geralt's, and then also
I really
Yennefer
thought
and
about
Ciri?
this because I quite recently read the Season of Storms book. There they use a similar way where it's like these characters that we've gotten to know, like Geralt and Yennefer and Ciri. They're talked about as if they are fictional characters. Like these legends, these stories that we follow, and it's almost like we're the children sitting there and being like, "Well, I want to hear about this one, but no, I want to hear about this guy." I always imagined like the old man. What's his name? Is Stribog? I imagined
Yeah.
that he is Sapkowski. Like he's like, "No, we're gonna go this way. I'm gonna talk about this." Exactly.
Feed me milk.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly right, because he almost never uses the authorial voice, does he? Other than telling the story, but he's pretty much put himself directly into the book.
Pretty
there
much,
as Strybog. He would never normally do that, like explain something to the reader. He just doesn't do it. He'll always put someone in like Applegate to tell you what's going on,
Yeah.
rather than breaking the fourth wall to say, "Hey, I'm the writer, and by the way, this is not normal for what's this area and stuff." It's the characters will tell you that. It's interesting because there's the troubled girl who sort of tells the future in this chapter.
Yeah.
And that's lovely because, this whole thing with, storytelling and legends and 200 years in the future, someone talking about these events and stuff as if they were myths and legends. And that's really borne out by the fact that the whole front piece to the book is from Florence Delanoy, who was the guy who wrote down, the Witcher and the Witcher Girl, these old, a couple of hundred years into the future. He's the one who's going to write these stories, collect them together in these anthologies of myths and legends of the Nordlings and things. So he's frequently quoted, and sometimes instead of him being quoted, you'll get Effenberg and Talbot quoting from him. So it's great. So, but from that, what I really love is that it's a really involved description about, and the soothsayer said unto the Witcher, you put on iron-clad boots and an iron staff, and when they've completely worn away and you've been through all the pain and heartache in the world, then maybe at the end you'll know. It's like, wow. And that's not what the girl says at all. She says something very odd. She talks about, iron clogs at one moment, and it's like, what the hell was that about? I don't remember that in the future.
Yeah.
It's quite odd. And then someone with the time on their hands, it's the same way that the Arthurian legends grow. It's like there was clearly some stories that were told at the time, but then, later romanticists have just put layers and layers of crap on top of it, and we all just accept it, and it's really in your face in this, just introducing Nimue to us, for instance, and we first meet her here. She's like a little anime girl, this little tiny scrap of a thing with a kitten who's like, I want to hear about Yennefer. And then later on, or Milva, tell us about Milva. If I can't be a sorceress, I want to be an archer. This little cute kid who we know will actually, it's not just sharing the name from the Arthurian legend. She really does become the Lady of the Lake in this story.
Yeah.
It's quite something that there's that character. So that whole bringing myths and legends in and things, it's quite deliberate. It's not an accidental thing that you read into it. It's absolutely put there.
I remember
front and center.
preparing for this episode and reading Nimue, her name, and I was like, wait, I didn't know that I didn't know that he put her in here already. I was so surprised. You have sort of this like presumption that Sapkowski sometimes he does things at random a bit, and he doesn't really plan things, and then he's like, but it's because of this. But here it's like the question is, did he take inspiration from this story, or when writing the Nimue that we know in the future, or was it the other way around? Like, did he plan this from here? Because I was just very surprised to see her name. Yeah.
I think it could go either way. I don't think we'll ever know. I could 100% believe both.
It's such a specific name, though.
Yes.
And, because the character in the Arthurian legend, that Nimue is the Lady of the Lake who sometimes brings Excalibur out of the water, but certainly is meant to be the one who locked Merlin under the ground, for instance, in one version of the telling. And but yeah, she's certainly a person of extreme power, and frequently is supposed to be married to the Fisher King, which very noticeably is another character that crops up in this story. And as does Gawain, just turns up straight right there. So the Sapkowski, like so many writers, likes to play with the Arthurian legend as well. So much fun having it building his own at the same time.
Going back to Abbe's comment about also like constantly also the referencing and stuff, is like when later that's the ranger, I don't know what the best way.
Yeah, the young woman. Yeah.
When she's prophesizing, she's also already mentioning the title of the next book. I think she's also said at a certain point also like one of the things she then mentions the Tower of Swallows.
Yes.
I don't know like how long it took between Sapkowski's. I can imagine the first time you read it, like if you're like following an order, like that they still have to be released, and you're like, oh, Tower of Swallows, whatever, and then you see the title of the next book, and you're like, I've seen that before somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'm quickly reading back, and then you're like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of those little seeds, I would say. But also like a lot of them that go nowhere.
Yes.
I'm not sure. Well, I would say he does it on purpose, actually. Like a lot of nowhere going seeds. Because he kills them also off quite a lot.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's pretty 50-50. I think jury's out on whether or not he plans or not, or if, as Abe said, like if he goes back to his previous stories and cherry picks, which is a great tool for a writer, going back and suddenly it seems like you've thought everything through when really you've just cherry picked from your previous work. I really like the framing narrative. I think aside from, everything that it sets up in the story, I think for the reader, it provides almost a sense of comfort that these stories will have a conclusion, a satisfying conclusion, even though we're still anticipating how they're going to play out. As the excerpt says during the Battle of the Bridge, like these characters are destined for death in like other places and times. But for the moment, we know that even though this feels very epic, there's more of their story to come, and they will pass into legend, and we'll continue to hear about them. So I think there's something really nice about this little snippet of the chapter. But yeah, definitely leads the reader to believe that there's more than just what's happening in the present day.
But he's another bit of his neat characterization as well is that Strybog is making rock soup. That, with that thing where you turn up at someone's house, and so as not to put them off by asking them for a big favor, you say, can I just, have some firewood so I can make some rock soup? I've got the water and stuff already. And so, what's rock soup then? It says, well, it's, it's just like soup made with rocks. And it's like, is that okay? Well, it would be better with a few onions. Well, I've got some onions. And and then you ask for a bit of, And so he's doing the same thing here. He sends one kid off to get a bit of buttermilk from the house and another one off to get something from their house. So he's taking a little bit from all the houses.
Yeah.
So he's not outstaying his welcome. It's very sneaky. So I think any decent babysitter learned that. Is to go to the refrigerator and take a little bit of everything rather than eat all the cheese or something.
But I also like still about Strindberg's Park, getting back to the sort of like the epic, and the narrative structure. It's also like that he also like is used to quickly say, oh yeah, remember Ciri and Yennefer? Don't worry, they get back in the next book.
Yeah.
But these are the two things you can look out for. And it's also like with Jennifer's mainly, oh yeah, she's now landed in the Skellig Isles. We've never been there. Saw them last time, some of them in, what is it, Last Wish. So, how it's gonna be like there. And with Ciri, it's like, Leo Bonhart, watch out.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just like that they were building up some tension for people you would otherwise have forgotten because of all the other stuff happening, so to
Because
speak.
it feels like sort of on the next episode. It feels like Sapkowski
Yes.
really wants to be able to tell this story like about the current Hansa, and like focus on them in this chapter. So his way of like I guess not leaving the other characters out for the last chapter is like he's like, hey guys, they're gonna be fine. Like, just bear with me.
Absolutely. As Softie said, it really does feel like the children are a proxy for us as the reader, and Strabog is Sapkowski to whatever extent he sees himself in that character. Yeah, and as we move past the framing narrative, we return to the company, and Geralt, who's sitting within his own framing narrative, mulling over the recent events that the Hansa have experienced. One of the big pieces in the beginning of the chapter, which actually takes up, I think, more page time than the Battle of the Bridge itself, is the company's concern about Regis as like their vampiric companion. How does Regis's decision to reveal his past affect the group's perception of him? And how would you guys say Sapkowski's portrayal of vampires challenges or reinforces traditional vampire tropes?
Based on when it was written, because obviously it came out in 1996. Massive in the early 90s was Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula film with Gary Oldman. And then The Interview with the Vampire came out with... it was the first time Tom Cruise is playing a very tall character that he really shouldn't have been. But, not nearly as baffling as being Jack Reacher, I don't think. But
There's
anyway,
an irony to the name,
that's
certainly.
that's an aside. This was obviously, the internet was very much in its infancy, sort of even in 96 when the book was being written. So then it was all about, magazine articles and newspapers and, talk shows and things, and people talking, frankly, bollocks about vampires became massive, and I just think this was Sapkowski sitting there being all grumpy in the background, thinking, well, gonna be rude about most of these theories, particularly all the ones which was all about, well, of course, in those days you couldn't write salacious books, so they just had about, blood being sucked from the neck instead of writing about sex because they couldn't write these sorts of things, and it's all cobblers, but he kind of dismisses it all with this. And I really enjoyed that, because if you look at it as a straight addiction to alcohol and things, the way that he does when he talks about, and a lot of it is just played for laughs, really, drinking and flying and stuff. It's a lot, but with nice bits of magical realism thrown in, like flying into the well and stuff, and being stunned in the village and then cut to pieces, and his head cut off and thrown in the ground. Time I pulled myself together, literally. It's very amusing, but I don't think he's making a deeper point about addiction and things. I don't think we could go that far. It's not like he's saying, have you ever thought about if we all accept drinking alcohol as being okay and everything, but if you think of it as like if it was drinking blood and stuff, how would you feel? It's not really what he's doing. He's just playing it for laughs.
Yeah.
I also like the contrast in that with Regis, how we see him throughout this book. He's very educated, sometimes a bit too much of a pompous smartass, but also always, I would say, very dignified.
Mm-hmm.
But the way he describes himself as young Regis, it honestly feels like a bit like just like a little frat boy,
Yeah.
like sort of like going out with his friends, like drinking, hosting wet t-shirt contests or whatever else they do, like in American colleges, like like going crazy that kind of way. And I just can't take him serious or something, like as if he's sort of like, instead of dunking a can of beer, then a can of blood again. So I don't know, just vampires being dumb and silly. A bit like, in that sense, maybe What We Do in the Shadows. It still uses vampiric tropes, but they don't take it serious. They're like, just let's make it funny instead.
Yeah, it is very absurdist, What We Do in the Shadows, and then, obviously, to an extent, this.
It also gives it a nice throw forward, doesn't it? The idea that I don't drink at all, I don't touch a drop because, it affects me really badly. And it's like, what would happen, I wonder, if Regis was to have a drop of blood later in this story? Might he start cutting up a bit rough, it's quite a nice little thing just to store
for
away.
me, Regis feels they throw every stereotype out of the window, and he's very human. Like when you look at it, and he has all of these vulnerabilities and his addictions that people can relate to. But he's also sort of this embodiment of all human fears. We sometimes blame monsters for the things that we fear in ourselves, in humans. It can always be hinted back to, like, okay, well, maybe humans do this too, or maybe humans are the actual ones doing all these things. Yeah, and I love Sapkowski's his use of fantasy as a sort of satire to real life. The whole series is very much like very anti-fantasy, although it's a very high fantasy kind of. It really flips it on its head, kind of.
Yeah. I like what you said about this is kind of the moment where Regis feels the most human, both because of the story that he's telling and the vulnerability that he has. I think the irony there is that everything about the content of the story is then uniquely vampiric. And I think there's like an irony in that the more he tells them about his experience as a vampire, the more he seems trustworthy, I assume, to the group. Like, there are all of these unspoken fears that especially Milva and Dandelion feel when they tell Geralt about their concerns. But I do think Regis preemptively talking to them is probably for the best. One, considering the trust building amongst the Hansa, and two, I can't imagine him leaving Dandelion out to like ask more questions for the rest of their time together.
Regarding Regis's frat boy era, I found a quote here. It's like he's talking about his past, and another vampire said to him, "Don't fancy a drink, and you call yourself a vampire." It's the like, you're not a man, you're not mad enough, and it's both very funny, but it's also like embedded in a sort of very serious like this group pressure of like having to like fit in. That was his only way to literally drink blood and slaughter villages. The vampire version, I guess.
There was also the vampire girl he was really sweet on, but
Yeah.
she left him because he was always drunk.
And then he doubles his intake, and then and flying while drinking.
The wonderful thing where Regis reluctantly goes on to the sexual side of the stories that humans have about vampires and what it's standing in for and stuff. Where he's kind of mocking the theories that were going around at the time. It's just lovely that Milva's sitting there like, what are you, hey? And then Dandelion explains what they're talking about. Oh, bloody typical men, sound clever, but you're just talking about shagging as usual. Don't you think about
the one funny line that stood out to me in that was Regis talking about oral sex and being like, it doesn't have anything to do with procreation, and Geralt's like, says you.
Speak for yourself.
It's a quote that's unexpected for people who haven't read the books, I think. Regis's reveal is one of the big set pieces for this chapter. One of the other ones that immediately follows is the reveal of Milva's pregnancy. Do you believe it was ethical for Regis to involve the group in the decision about her pregnancy, or should he have respected her request without asking input from Cahir, Geralt, and Dandelion? And why do you think Milva chooses to confide in Geralt specifically about her pregnancy?
I think this is a trap, isn't it? We've got 3 men on to talk about a woman's right to choose. And Regis asked the 3 men in the story to know what their point of view was on Milva's situation. I see what you did.
Life mimics art, right? That's the that's the quote, right?
Is this coincidence or
was it meant
like the setup?
Big brain moment.
So
social engineering.
No.
I know that it's a challenging topic, I think, obviously, because this is something that can be still controversial for people, women's right to choose. I think, again, this is something that for people who aren't familiar with the books and with the way that Sapkowski intersperses current events in his writing, I do think that the ideas are probably quite forward. for the time of writing and even potentially now. Yes, it is four men talking about what a woman should and shouldn't do, but I think unexpectedly, Cahir says in a very factual way that, like, well, in Nilfgaard, of course women have the right to choose, therefore I've assumed that the way that Milva's talking about this, like, it's just going to go the way she wants and she can choose to take that agent and not have a child. Whereas, Regis, again, does what she asks, but still asks for input from the group. They have a whole spiel about how we're being promoted to the role of husbands and fathers. I have acquaintances who are on both sides, whether fathers should have input or whether it is always the woman's right to choose, regardless of anybody else's decision. From a purely medical ethicals perspective, I don't think it was appropriate for Regis to ask the other men for their input. I think in the context of the characters and their dynamic, I think Regis was really looking for Geralt to comfort Milva. Whether or not he had to do that in front of Cahir and Dandelion, probably not. But I do think he was trying to imply that, Geralt, you should probably help Milva out because she needs to talk about this with somebody. So I think that is something that a friend would probably do. It's a complicated question.
It's a really complicated piece of writing as well, because I found myself in the uncomfortable position of agreeing with Dandelion, which is not something you normally want to be doing. And, because my autism gets in the way with stuff like this, because it's all, nod, nod, wink, wink, well, you know what I'm talking about. I don't know what you're talking about because you haven't come out and said it, even though he says, it's explicitly what I want you to do, but you haven't been explicit at all. It's all, conveyed in nods and winks and understanding glances, which I am not privy to. So I don't know what you're doing. So when Dandelion's saying, I got no idea. Spent 20 years writing poetry. Don't understand what this is about at all. So I felt the same way, really. And I think it's done deliberately. I think he starts off with an absolute position of saying, it's a woman's right to choose. And Dandelion says, it's an inalienable right. Why are we even discussing this? So that's their starting point, which is great. But then it all turns grey. And there's so many ways of reading what happens next, because one of the ways you can read it quite easily is that Geralt's pro-life. He says, I can't help you to do this thing, if that's the help that she's talking about, although she doesn't need his help to.
Or like approval, I guess. Yeah.
The abortion, she's already getting that from Regis, so it's quite strange, but it's, I think it's more the permission that she was seeking there was the idea that if I can do this and then help you find Ciri, does that make me okay? It's about the absolution maybe that she's asking for. It's so opaque and hard to understand, and you have to pull the meanings yourself together from it, I think. It's an extraordinary piece of writing, but, the kindest way I can look at it is that Regis, as physician, thinks he has to stay completely neutral in this. He can't actually be the one to help Milva, but he thinks that Milva's got herself in this position where she doesn't think she's got a choice. Regis's understanding of that is it's not freedom of choice. If, you're not making a choice if you don't think you've got one, you should have options. And that maybe what she really needs is just someone to care about her a little bit and show something, because she's had a hell of a life, Milva, to get to the point that she's at. And, it's not like Geralt stepping in and saying, I'll, be a father figure or anything like that. He's just literally showing her a little bit of compassion in the darkness, which then she's saying, why are you shaking? It's just a memory. He doesn't say what it is, but I assume it's from S.E. Darwin, because there was the similar thing there with them sitting in the dark and not knowing quite how to communicate, because Geralt is, the poster boy for autism. He's fantastic. He's our banner bearer.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd put Geralt on my list of fathers to choose, considering he's 0-1 for losing children at the moment. So I don't know if I would, he'd be my first choice right now. They still haven't found the first one.
He certainly doesn't put any pressure on us. I'm not saying that the reading should be that he's pro-life. I think it's just, from his own perspective, it's, if I could have a child of my own, I would, it would be so precious. I don't know if that's what he's saying, but he only says that after she's upset. He doesn't try and persuade her in any way. She makes a decision, I think, by herself.
Yeah. I think it's probably also about the idea that she needs permission to go through with either taking that agent or choosing to keep that child. Yeah, like I don't think Geralt's, when he says he can't help her, I think it is like he can't let her use Ciri to find redemption. Like he can't help her with any of that either.
Yeah, because you could even be like, we can't afford to wait around 10 days for you to get better, so I can't help you. There's so many ways to read it. It's, It's a very, very peculiar situation to be in with that. And obviously the great irony being that regardless of the decision, events overtake things anyway. So feel like you've chosen one thing and then something else happens anyway.
Yeah, as it goes.
I also sometimes interpreted the scenes like, well, like the first thing Regis does after hearing this news from Milva, first thing he does, he first makes that potion. That's a step one, even which I think is already shows like, okay, sure, doctor being a doctor, but he does that without question. So I think that's already saying a lot. And I feel like partially that discussion he then has with the rest of the group, whatever the decision is we make now, it will technically also have impact on the group because we're traveling through a war zone. If that's the good or more ethical reason, that's also is very debatable. But that could be maybe then mindset of like, well, for now it impacts the entire group. Whatever we decide. But I also think, and that's more, I guess, more humane side. Milva, what she needs most is not using the potion or not using the potion, but yeah, her group to support her. In the same way, when something intense happens in your life, you want your family or your support group to support you, whatever decision you make. She doesn't feel like she has a choice. So if we show her support, she can feel she has a safe space to make the choice she feels is right. That's kind of like how I saw it, like the feeling like that they're like behind her to show like whatever you decide is where we'll go with her.
I also
with,
had to
so
like
speak.
read this specific part, like I think I read it like 6 times straight through just to get it all in, kind of. I really got like stuck with this one quote where it's impossible to repay something that has no price. And in that case, I'm not really sure exactly what he's talking about, because they were talking about how Milva wants to, when she set out on her journey with Geralt, her like helping him find his child was sort of gonna repay what she was about to do, kind of. But I also feel like that connection to Ciri is sort of part of like why he understands her. He was sort of in her scenario where he didn't really have a choice in getting Ciri, I guess, since she was his shadow of surprise. So he both understands her, but also he's on this journey for a reason. So he developed like this huge love for this child. I think that's sort of what he's trying to convey. Also, Milva sort of sees how much Ciri means to Geralt. I don't quite remember like how Milva's father was. He was quite abusive, wasn't he?
She had a good relationship with her biological father. After he passed away, I believe her mother remarried and her stepfather was abusive.
But her relationship with her own father was also quite strained because he was ill and knew he was dying. Her father turned to her then to try and train her to go into the woods and hunt. And she's, remembered that, he would hit her when she couldn't hold the bow properly and stuff. It was quite a hard way to learn. What's she getting from the mum's side is, a woman always knows whose fruit she bears and stuff, like that. She's straight away had to remarry, that's her role in life. She's got nothing else. It's really hard, what Milva's been through, and then to find that she's being hunted by gamekeepers and things and forced into hunting in Broccolon and then being captured by the Dryads and then being forced to go out and lead people into these murder traps and things. And then she says, it's who she was, that she started to enjoy that. And that's what she's got to atone for.
Yeah.
Maria's having to pay for what Milva did. But it's quite something that, Milva is such a capable character, the way she's come across to us to this point. We're introduced to her hunting and just her deep knowledge of the woods and everything, and how hard won that knowledge is that she's got, and how that's the kind of thing that keeps her independent, her ability to hunt and feed herself, to not being forced into prostitution, into a town, or become someone's plaything, or just hunted for sport by somebody. To suddenly see her so completely cut down and vulnerable the way she is in this moment with Geralt, it's quite something. And she's so hard on herself as well. She talks about herself as being useless and a burden and everything. It's she's a great character. She's a blue collar hero for one thing. She's one of the things I like about her. She's very proud of the fact she, I don't have any education and stuff, but I know right from wrong, and you lot are idiots. Yeah. She's terrific. She's absolutely my favorite side character.
Like about
in the saga.
Parents, because both of the parents, she seemed to have a very like complicated relationship to them in any case. Her being this very complicated character that she's been through so much. I feel like her conversation with Geralt, Geralt isn't in any way saying you shouldn't do this, or you should do this. He's just sort of like talking to her, or letting her talk, pretty much. Basically, just being a shoulder to lean on in this moment. And like, at least from what I read, it felt like Geralt gives her some sort of hope that being a parent might not be all bad. And like you mentioned as well, to be able to make a choice, she needs to feel like she has choices and not just like she has to do this. Like her feeling so restrained within herself, again, not seeing herself capable of being a parent. Geralt feels like a vessel that sort of helps her understand what parenthood could be, in a way. Something like that. Again, it's a very complex, being a parent. I only have cats. I don't have any actual children. But it's a very complex burden, and also a big joy. Again, he gives her some sort of hope in this scene.
The real world side of this is complicated. It's amazing how everything changes for you when sort of parenthood suddenly looms.
Yeah.
Because certainly when my wife was first pregnant, she was on some very strong medication and she wasn't supposed to be able to get pregnant. So it was oh, okay, so what do we do? And it was, and they were saying, well, we're not sure what effect this will have because this is unusual. This shouldn't have happened. And it's like, so you may want to consider abortion, and never really thought about it before, other than that, yeah, it's always someone's right. But of course, I was brought up to believe that because my mother had to have an abortion. So she'd always explained that to us, that she'd had us 4 kids and a 5th one was on the way and she was not going to survive. It was a 50-50 chance of the baby surviving. So her choice was to leave my father on his own with 4 children, or to take a choice that she found difficult. And she always felt very guilty about it because she had 4 healthy children. So she talked very honestly about that. But that's what I was brought up to believe. So that's why I believed what I believed, which is, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. There will always be reasons for it to be okay, and that it should be something that you choose. But then I was suddenly faced with it, like, did you want to have an abortion or not? And it was suddenly, I felt very strongly. It's like, it wasn't let's think about it, theoretically. It was like, no, this is actually, I know there's this tissue forming that's partly me and partly my wife. And it's like, no, I can't go through with that. Let's see what happens. So it's really odd. So I sort of found myself actually on the side of life from not having really thought about it before. Not thought about it properly, not been thrown into the position of actually having to think about it properly. And it's quite odd. You might find there's a side of yourself that doesn't agree with what you think you believe. So it's very strange. So I did find this a very odd thing to be looking into, that it's just as complicated as written as it is to experience it.
Yeah.
I have one last thing to add to this. And after Geralt's conversation, or Milva's and Geralt's conversation, Geralt turns to Regis to talk. And to me, this wonderful conversation, or like meetup, where they talk about changing the route due to Milva's condition, and he's like very intense when he's talking about it. He's like, we gotta do this. We have to look out for her. And I think at some point, Regis is like, whoa, like, calm down. Like, I get what you're trying to say, but I need you to like take a few breaths. Yeah, I imagine that Regis sees the effect that Milva's situation has on Geralt. It's all of these bonds that are forming, and senses of like security, and like, I can talk to this person about something that I'm deeply concerned about. I think it's beautiful.
And you're right, because Regis reads them so well already, doesn't he? I mean, he hasn't known them that long. But if Milva recognizes the way that you're trying to mollycoddle her, she's going to whoop your ass.
Yeah.
And that's going to stress her out, and that's bad for the baby, so you just cut it out, Geralt. Just, change direction, but don't make a big deal out of it.
Yeah. I was listening to a productivity workshop, anyway, New Year's things, but one of the prompts for kind of like getting yourself back on track, or like New Year's resolutioning, was, if you look at yourself as like the hero of like a film or a story, what would the audience be yelling at you right now? What would they be yelling at you to do? And you should go do that thing. And that, like, in the spirit of that, like, I feel like Regis is a proxy for the audience in that way. Obviously, he's done the company for a very short period of time, but as you say, Softie, he's pretty dialed in. And I do feel like that is what the audience would be yelling at Geralt. To just like, don't try to do anything rash. Don't be overprotective because it's not going to end well for anybody. And as we see, you know, it doesn't really end well for anybody in any case, but for the moment.
Yeah, and just on a side note there, he did very well with the environmental thing about looking after fish stocks, but Regis throwing a bottle away in the woodlands with all these wildfires going on, should do better.
It did occur to me. I was like, they're just like peasants, they're soldiers roaming. I don't think anybody's ridiculous enough to like pick up a mysterious vial and drink it. But like, what happens if somebody does?
Never, I feel.
Yeah. Some poor Nilfgaardian suddenly has the runs or something. I don't know. Daniel, was there anything you wanted to add before we go to the next question?
Between the segment that Regis comes out and says, hey, Milva's pregnant, and a moment Milva tells Geralt who the father could be, so to speak, because of the clarity. I remember sitting there, and because I didn't really understand the constant sort of like looks and the nods between Geralt and Regis, like it was like, okay, I presume one of the guys here is the father, but who is it?
Yeah.
And I suspected Kahir to be the one. I don't remember what the reasons was, but I felt like, maybe it's Kahir? Like I was trying to think like sort of like who was it, and that was at least my suspicions like for that like 1.5 page or something till we found out. So I was wondering, did you guys have something like that too, or
it's it's extraordinary when she actually unburdens herself as to how she conceived in the first place. I liked about it was the she-elf there who was saying just a little love on the edge of death, the way that they were like that. That's just the ultimate way of spitting in death's eye, isn't it? It's just, we're likely to die in the morning, so let's just make love. And I just thought that was really quite lovely, the way they described that, because it could have been seen as something entirely different. It was quite touching, in fact, as an odd situation to have been in, but, in its own way, kind of beautiful.
Yeah. I think it's that desire for a sense of just, I think, safety and security. And I think just a moment of like peace and presence when you're constantly worried about what's coming from like all sides, whether it's Nilfgaard or the North, everybody's after, the Scoia'tael, and just constantly being on the run like that. I think having a moment to feel present and feel, at peace is probably a huge part of that.
That was definitely a conversation she could only have had with Geralt, because she couldn't have discussed that in front of Dandelion. That would have gone very differently.
They're in such a horrible situation, and it's written in a way that really makes you both feel their sense of dread and horror, but also their longing, their hope for something else. So it's written in a really beautiful and horrifying way, I guess, and it's a very interesting way to like dive between the two. But to answer your question, Daniel, I remember like reading the part and just being very like, hold up a second, like where how when how like I was very confused, and I don't think I like started getting theories. I was very sure it wasn't Geralt. I started looking at Dandelion, but I was like, no, he like Milva would punch him at Ennis.
Did I skip something here?
Sort of.
I know. I feel like out of the whole company, it's most likely to be an immaculate conception as opposed to anything else. When you look at all the options, you're like, oh, I don't know. A vampire, a witcher, an Nilfgaardian, and just an office rocker bard. Like, I don't know.
I mean, you were drinking quite a bit at Regis, so we don't know what happened there.
It's true. We haven't suspected Percival of anything yet.
He did wake up under a doormat.
We've spoken about some of the larger set pieces of this chapter, and looking at the chapter as a whole, it features themes of identity and redemption. How would you guys say these themes are explored through Milva's pregnancy, Geralt's and Gihir's reluctant leadership during the Battle of the Bridge, Zoltan's confession, and Regis's sobriety?
Well, I can maybe first start with one of the parts or scenes we haven't talked about yet before, so the one with Zoltan's confession. What I really like about this chapter, partially because of those short bits, is that it gives time for these kind of moments, and then you get basically Zoltan to return to look for redemption, so to say. I would say he comes back, he's like, hey, I did this in the past, which is a bad thing. I regret it. That's why I'm admitting it happened, but I want to try to atone for it. And I would say that worked, personally, at least for me, quite well. I guess one part of, step one is acceptance, or wanting redemption. And at the same time, he's helping those refugees he found on the road, that girl from the camp. It's very clear that he wants to improve. It's basically good stuff on keeping Zoltan nice, memorable dwarves,
Both
I'd
with
say.
Sultan, but also with the rest of with Milva, Geralt, Cahir, and Regis. All of these moments that sort of come back to sort of acceptance of yourself and sort of forgiveness as well. Because Sultan, he has a very hard time, but I feel like sort of succeeds in forgiving himself in the end. It's more Geralt that says like, no, I'm gonna see you as who you want to be, not for a thing you did. I'll accept your want and your need of change, and that's very beautiful to me. Yeah, but also with Geralt and Cahir's leadership, Regis' sobriety, it's also becoming who you're supposed to be, or maybe who you need to be in that moment, as well. I think I wrote, like you get a fire and you get a fire. They're all going through their own little fires, their
Yes.
little baptisms. They're put in situations that force them to choose who they want to be.
Yeah. We'll talk about the imagery of a baptism of fire in the next question. But something that we've discussed, especially in the earlier parts of the book, is that there's only so much that really happens plot-wise, and things are about to happen, then they don't actually pay off. Or they meet a monster and then they just scare it away. That sort of thing. As we said, like, redemption really comes to a head here, and like we get that payoff from all of those previous scenes. With Geralt's Cahir and that battle on the bridge, they have tried to, I think, atone for their previous behavior. We see that in Regis, we see that in Milva. And I love Cahir's, it's kind of putting his money where his mouth is. He's spoken the whole time about, like, I'm not an elf guardian and I need to help you find Ciri, but I can only tell you so much. And like, you're gonna get mad at me when I tell you that we share dreams. But you're actually seeing him. He's like, do I have to fight my own? And Geralt's like, I don't care. Like, I don't care about this war. This is about Milva. So either join me or join them. Just do it quick. And he decides to join the company. And now he's, truly part of the Hansa. And I really enjoy that sequence and finally closing the loop on Cahir.
It's a nice joke as well that he's crossing the Rubicon moment, is crossing the Uruga.
Yeah.
So literally crossing the river at a time when he has to make this decision. Yeah, it's, the old idea of a baptism is it's supposed to change you, isn't it? Typically it's a ceremony you go through to accept a new belief system or something and to go forward as a different person from this time forward. And these all go through a very different kind of baptism here. But they all really, get welded together into the Hansa through this. All their previous loyalties and things are all gone. They're all there for each other now, and their common purpose to go and help Geralt find Ciri, which is gorgeous. Very fitting that it's all around fire again. We know that Ziriel the swallow has turned into Falca, the falcon, but her symbol now is all about fire. This whole book has been, when you first read it, it's just such a mess because they're just wandering around aimlessly in different directions. They have no idea where they're going. They're purposefully striding in there. Geralt just cannot stand still. I think it's really good that you've got fire all around them, smoke rising everywhere. So Ciri could be anywhere, fire all around. And at this point, you've got the fire at the bridge as well. It's all fire leading them on towards Ciri. It's amazing. It's really quite well crafted, you'd have to say.
So the imagery of the baptism of fire is really central to not just this chapter, but of course the whole book. From the young woman's prophecy to the Battle of the Bridge, how does Sapkowski use fire as both a literal and a symbolic element?
In a sense, you always hear that fire purifies, I guess.
Yeah, they say that so much. Fire burns, but also purifies.
13 times.
Who's counting?
And one time it's implied. It talks about a trial of fire rather than a baptism. So there's 14 really.
But yeah, so fire purifies and all that. Sometimes when I'm reading books, I imagine like shots or like movie shots or like something I would draw, and definitely one of those moments is when I believe Geralt and Cahir is just like jumping through a fire together, like side by side, and just that shot of them just jumping through the fire is both very symbolic and obviously literal. They're jumping through this fire, and they're sort of both making this choice of, this is where we're going. I'm choosing this now. There's no turning back. If I go back, I'll never forgive myself. Pretty much, like it's yeah.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the Spanish cover of Baptism of Fire, it is that
It
specific
is?
moment of Geralt and Cahir on the bridge. It's fantastic. It's beautiful. The Spanish covers are wonderful. But that is the excerpt that I have just committed to memory, where it says, "And that was their baptism of fire, a baptism of shared fighting, fury, madness, and death. They were going to their death, the two of them, or so they thought, for they could not know they would not die that day on the bridge over the river Yaruga. They could not know they were destined for other deaths in other places and times." That stood out to me just as so beautiful and so profound. Because when we've talked about baptism of fire, or the concept of a baptism of fire, in every other place in the book, it just felt almost like a tease, or in certain places like a cop-out. Like they're all meant to go through a baptism of fire to get the horseshoe, and then Regis is just like, just kidding, this is a trifle for me. And then he kind of like absolves them of that, and kind of wanders away like, haha, I did it. And this, though, like it feels like the true payoff and culmination of the concept. And I just found it, the way it's worded, even in the English translation, which I know I'm obligated to say is inferior to every other iteration of the book. But I've found it so beautifully written. And I do enjoy that this description of it is so grand and I think so profound. And then it's immediately followed by Geralt's being like, I'm fighting through this fire. I was supposed to fight through a fire for Ciri, but this is just stinging me and not actually purifying me. This is garbage. And I feel like we're brought back to kind of the reality of this battle quite quickly, where it doesn't feel as legendary and mythological, but suddenly very singular, I guess, in that experience.
Quinsley has already just grabbed that quote of Geralt.
Yeah.
But it also feels very Sapkowski to have something like that. A baptism of fire. I was meant to pass through fire for Ciri, and I'm passing through fire in a battle which is of no interest to me at all, which I don't understand in any way. The fire that was meant to purify me is just scorching my hair and face. It feels so Geralt to be like, being very romantic, and I'm being like, this is not what I imagined at all when I said baptism of fire. This is just burning my hair.
This isn't what I ordered.
There's also that nice little aside where he wants to use the Ard sign to blow the fire away.
Yeah.
It's like, but I haven't had my elixirs for a while, so I'm not sure it's going to work. And it's like, oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Elixirs to boost your sign casting ability. It's canon. It's not just CDPR.
There's a clear difference between like his romanticization of like, oh, this baptism of fire, and then, fire. Right
Yeah.
in my face. Yeah. And also like this part, like right before, and so they set off, scattering the still burning pyre, blah blah blah. And for me, I am being taken back to like the old guy talking to the children. Like he's telling this story of how they're in this battlefield. It's sort of taken into this other perspective again. Of this fight, and I also I'm pretty sure maybe in the end of the chapter when he's being knighted, it's like mentioned like he was knighted in a battle that was of course not mentioned anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the historians felt pretty much the same as Geralt, and this battle was useless. Even though they were defending like the queen and like this very like vital point of their Yaruga, so it was a very, in my perspective, quite like important battle, even though it was quite small.
It's nice to have it sort of swell suddenly like a big chorus into this heroic fantasy moment, and described in those same terms as like, down through the Lord of the Nazgul and all this. This is straight the way Tolkien would have written it, that bit. And then obviously with the ouch, it's actually quite hot.
Yeah.
I'm not enjoying this at all. And then and now he's going to be knighted, and there's all the fun and games about, the fact that he's made his name up and now he's been given it formally and stuff. But just that, Queen Meave, the MILF queen, there she is, spitting blood out and things. Some bastard hit me in the face. It's just, there's all these human touches to it.
Yeah.
That take it out of the
Or this
legends.
bastard.
Also feel that the scene is also perspectives of, of the big fantasy battle. For most of, it's since the start, you see the Scoia'tael or then Fryhead Brigade, see the elves fight heavily on the side of Nilfgaard. first, as guerrillas armed pre-war, and then as more like vanguard and disruption forces during the war itself. But that's the elves, and you see the dwarves. But the dwarves, like Zoltan, they're more clearly stuck in between. And then you suddenly see here a lot of mention of dwarf mercenaries. Quite a few seem to be mentioned, and suddenly like dwarves are also becoming a part. They become more involved. I would say the first time was very unexpected or something like, huh, why are there suddenly dwarves? But yeah, I think it's fascinating to see like, okay, so there was dwarves one side, elves on the other side, Nilfgaard one side, Northern Realms on the other side. So it's a bit more of a bigger clash or something like than it beforehand or so for me.
Yeah, it deliberately shows how confusing it all is, doesn't it? Like the very first fight that the Hansa are watching from a distance is, oh, Nilfgaard, they're attacking our boys. Well, our boys, the way that the dwarves and the others are talking about it, would be the Tiberian forces. But in fact, it's the forces of Verdan fighting for Nilfgaard against Brugge, who are standing in. It's like these two stand in, and then the Squirtel join in, and then eventually the Nilfgaardians join in as well. And you just think, yeah, this is a real mess. So all the loyalties are split.
War scales.
Yes. Or her house with a fire raging through it.
Let's not forget.
Yes, as we've heard a million times. So I think that actually will take us to the end of our discussion questions at the end of our book. Not just the chapter, but the book. That being said, do you guys have any final thoughts on both Chapter 7 of Baptism of Fire as well as the book as a whole?
I did actually enjoy a lot of the jokes in this chapter.
Yeah.
There was one of them that really stood out, though, was the whole thing about, the pun, the wordplay on gorillas and gorillas.
And baboons, yeah.
Yeah. And I was reading that thinking, that's quite brave, because that needs to work in the language that you're it's written in Polish, and it works in Polish, apparently. And it works in English. And I had a look, and it's 13 different languages have the same joke as possible, including Chinese. Wow. So it's almost as if he knew that this book was going to be published into multiple languages, or he just got really lucky with it.
Yeah.
It's quite an odd one.
I think Sapkowski doesn't care enough about other languages to really be like, does it work or not? He's just like, it doesn't work in their languages, it's their problem. I don't know. That's more the vibe he gives me, personally.
Yeah, I know he fancies himself as like a multilingual man, which I can verify to an extent, but I don't know how much he believes that.
Yeah. I think probably the best joke in it, though, is Zoltan, when he says to Dandelion that, turns out poets, life is not like poetry, it's far too resistant to criticism. I thought that was tremendous. That's it. That's a quote for the ages, that one.
Yeah, I would also just say what you already said earlier, Alyssa, like that a lot of this book meanders quite a bit, or you feel like, well, where is it going? What is kind of the point, nearly? Like, because they just keep wandering with where they're wandering to. They don't even really know either. But that, like, this chapter kind of proves why the rest had to exist beforehand or something. Like, it is a really good, climax of the book, I'd say. And definitely, I will admit, like, the first time reading through it, it is, because of that, also quite tough sometimes. But definitely if we then, after reading the last chapter and then rereading the book, then it's suddenly like, they notice how many breadcrumbs sort of Sapkowski straws around, and you feel like, okay, now they're getting closer, like they're becoming friends, they're being silly to each other. Okay, it's getting there, so to speak,
I think it's the way the saga works as a whole, isn't it? It's only when, I still say, until you've read The Lady of the Lake, you don't know what The Witch is about. You haven't got the faintest idea. And then after that, and going back and rereading, it's amazing what a different read it is when you know where it goes.
Yeah.
And as you say, it's those breadcrumbs, they all suddenly stand out. It's like, how did I miss all this? It's because I didn't know what it was leading me towards, that's why.
There are so many like little hints and like breadcrumbs, like you're talking about, that are placed, like Nimue and the prophecy about on the members of the Hansa. What was it? Somebody who sucks blood will pay in blood, and stuff like that. It really ends the book on a like what happens now, and also with Geralt just smiling to himself with the knighthood. I found that really amusing. Him just his head down to the ground, nobody can see him, and he's just like smiling, and he's like, I can't believe this is happening. Like
Yeah.
he's one of us basically in that moment.
It's fun to revisit all the Witcher books, but this book in particular on the podcast, because for years it was like, Baptism of Fire is my favorite. And now that we're at the end of it, looking down the tunnel at the inevitability of also reading Tower of Swallows and Lady of the Lake, I'm excited to be proven wrong, but I still find so much joy in reading Baptism of Fire because it is getting the company back together. And revisiting the Battle of the Bridge, which I just find that part of the chapter so compelling. Meeting Milva, getting to know Regis, getting to know Cahir on a different level, and all of these silly things that happen with the company being drunk off their asses in Regis's hut, or the whole sequence with the giant centipede creature, and just getting to know Zoltan and his boys. It's a moment of levity in the rest of the saga. In spite of the war that's happening, there's a lot of comfort, I think, to be found in how this company is growing together. It's a very comforting read to return to, and I'm very happy that we got to discuss it on the show. Anything else that you guys want to add?
Oh yeah, very small, but Thronebreaker usually is 90% off on the Steam sale. So wait until, if you want to buy it, wait until it's on the Steam sale. It has $20 for it otherwise, or $2 is a big difference.
Well, buy it for $2 and recognise that it was a $20 game. As it deserved to be. It's a great game.
I mean, I bought it originally for full price, but I also like Gwent, so I can understand. If you don't like Gwent, it's still a good game with Gwent, which you can sort of skip if you want, because then it's only story mode. But anyway, that's beside the point. Sorry.
I'm wondering if I can get it on Nintendo Switch.
I've seen it.
So, yeah.
I recently got a Switch and I saw it and I was like, this would be perfect for the Switch. So I'm pretty sure it is actually.
Okay, well, it's allegedly $19.99. I don't know if Nintendo Store will also price match Steam sales, but I can dream, or I can start playing it. I'm excited. I'm thrilled at the thought of playing this. Also because I think Softie's analysis is accurate, and Milva is the MILF queen.
She is.
I would die for her.
And honestly, after in that game, with also just her voice lines and just her character, you just also, she's amazing.
Yeah, you guys have sold this completely.
It's terrific. The artwork is so good because they haven't made her young and stuff, that she's literally like a middle-aged woman with a big scar on her face, so as she should be. She's terrific.
One great scene, but I would say, it's a spoiler, but it just comes also in the book, so it's not really a spoiler. But since at certain points you follow her being pursued through the swamps of Engren, and you feel the tension from her side, like, oh fuck, we're not gonna make it, because it's like an entire chapter long of being hunted.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, don't worry, we get to the ferry, and then all's done, and you're like, okay, this is gonna happen. And then you're like, arrive at the ferry, and then you have like one of her advisors, oh no, some weird guys jumped on the ferry and they ran away. And they're like, who could it be? And it's like, it is so great, because like if you have never read the books, it feels like, oh really, like, oh, what the fuck's going on? Why, who stole it? But if you're reading the books, you're like, hey, guess what's happening now? It is great for those who both have read it and have not read the book, so to say.
Yeah.
Leonardo DiCaprioing out of your seat when that bit comes along. I recognise this.
Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Thank you guys for all the Thronebreaker love. As soon as I get off of this, I might just go load that into my Nintendo Switch. And that is it for our show today. That's it for our season. Oh my goodness. Abbe, Daniel, Softie, thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode, and thank you to our Hansa for listening. You can find all three of our guests in the Hansa Discord. Well, there'll certainly be chit-chatting over the break. Breakfast in Beauclair will return on Thursday, September 4th with Tower of Swallows, or, God willing, The Witcher Season 4. Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastinbeauclair.com. Breakfast in Beauclair is created by Alyssa from Good Morning. It's hosted by Alyssa. The show is edited by Alyssa with music by Alex Berner. Breakfast in Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B. Schott from Bangor Glamorai, the original Roach, Libby, John of Rivia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, Softie, Lisa C., and Redkate. Special thanks to Abbe, Daniel, and Softie for joining us for this episode, and our international Hansa for their support.